The sun-scorched earth of Coyote Creek, Arizona, trembled beneath the hooves of a dozen galloping horses, dust billowing like angry spirits behind them. Jessie Knowles struggled to keep up, her hands raw from the rope binding her wrists to the saddle horn of the horse ahead. Her lungs burned with each labored breath as she stumbled, her feet barely catching her weight before she was yanked forward again by the merciless pace of Silas Redmond's gang. "Move faster, girl," Silas barked, his weathered face contorting with impatience. "Every minute you slow us down is another minute the law gains on us." It was 1878, and Jessie had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, a simple stop at Miller's General Store in Dry Gulch when Silas and his boys had come thundering in, guns blazing. Now she was their hostage, insurance against the posse that had been trailing them since their bank robbery 2 counties over. Jessie's ankle twisted on a hidden rock, sending her sprawling into the dirt. The rope went taut, nearly dislocating her shoulder as the horse continued forward, dragging her several feet before the rider noticed. "Silas!" the rider called out. "The girl's down again." Silas Redmond wheeled his horse around, his face a thundercloud of rage as he approached. The gang halted, nervous glances thrown over shoulders at the horizon behind them. "Get up," he hissed, leaning down from his saddle. "I told you what would happen if you slowed us down again." Jessie struggled to her feet, dirt caking her torn dress, blood seeping from scrapes on her knees and palms. Her honey-brown hair had come loose from its pins, falling in tangled waves around her face. Despite her 22 years, she felt like a child beneath Silas's menacing glare. "I can't keep up on foot," she pleaded, her voice barely audible through her parched throat. "Please, just let me go. I won't tell anyone which way you went." Silas's laugh was cold and sharp. "And waste a perfectly good hostage? I don't think so." He pulled his pistol from its holster. "But I did warn you about slowing us down." Jessie flinched as he aimed the gun at her, closing her eyes against what seemed inevitable. The shot rang out, echoing across the barren landscape, but the pain she expected never came. Instead, she heard a grunt and opened her eyes to see Silas clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "Next one goes between your eyes, Redmond," a deep voice called from somewhere behind them. "Let the lady go, and maybe I'll let you ride away with your life." The gang members scattered for cover, drawing weapons and searching frantically for the source of the voice. Jessie remained frozen in place, the rope still binding her wrists. "Show yourself, coward!" Silas shouted, his face contorted with pain and rage. From behind a large boulder some 50 yards away, a tall figure rose, rifle trained steadily on Silas. Even at that distance, Jessie could see the determined set of his jaw, the intensity in his posture. "Preston Vance, U.S. Marshal," the man called out, "and I'm giving you one chance to surrender peacefully." Silas spat on the ground. "1 man against 7. Those odds favor me, Marshal." The standoff lasted only seconds before gunfire erupted. Jessie threw herself to the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. Through the chaos, she felt strong hands grasp her shoulders, and she screamed, thinking one of Redmond's men had grabbed her. "Easy now," the deep voice from before said close to her ear. "I'm getting you out of here." She looked up into the most striking blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face that seemed carved from the very mountains that surrounded them. The marshal had somehow made his way to her side amidst the gunfight. "How did you—" she began, but he was already cutting the ropes from her wrists with a knife. "Questions later," he said, helping her to her feet. "Can you run?" Jessie nodded, though her ankle throbbed with pain. "Stay low and follow me," he instructed, keeping his body between her and the gunfire as they crouched behind a cluster of boulders. They moved from cover to cover, Marshal Vance firing precise shots whenever one of Redmond's men presented a target. His movements were fluid and confident, like a mountain lion navigating its territory. Eventually, they reached a dip in the landscape where a horse stood waiting. pawing at the ground nervously as the gunshots continued in the distance. "Get on," the marshal ordered, helping boost her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Hold tight." Jessie barely had time to grasp the saddle horn before the horse lunged forward, powerful muscles propelling them away from the skirmish. She could feel the marshal's solid chest against her back, his arm wrapped securely around her waist as he guided the horse with his other hand. They rode hard for what seemed like hours, the landscape changing from rocky terrain to sparse grassland. Finally, when the sun hung low in the western sky, painting everything in shades of amber and gold, the marshal slowed their pace. "We should be safe for now," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "There's a creek up ahead where we can rest." The creek was little more than a silver ribbon winding through the parched land, but to Jessie, it looked like paradise. When they dismounted, her legs buckled beneath her, weak from exertion and fear. Marshal Vance caught her before she hit the ground, his strong hands steady under her elbows. "Easy there, miss." "Knowles," she supplied, looking up at him. "Jessie Knowles." "Miss Knowles," he acknowledged with a slight nod. "You've had quite a day." Jessie couldn't help the small laugh that escaped her lips. "That's one way to put it, Marshal Vance." "Preston," he corrected, a hint of a smile softening his otherwise stern features. "Seeing as we'll be traveling together for a while, we might as well use our given names." He helped her to the creek's edge where she gratefully sank down and cupped water to her parched lips. Preston tended to his horse, a magnificent buckskin stallion, before joining her. "How did you find me?" Jessie asked, watching as he filled a canteen. "I've been tracking Redmond's gang for 3 weeks," he explained, his voice deep and steady. "Was closing in when they hit Dry Gulch. Witnesses said they took a hostage." His eyes, the color of a summer sky, met hers. "I didn't expect to find you keeping pace with them on foot." "Not by choice," Jessie said bitterly. "Silas kept saying I was too slow, that I'd get them all caught or killed. He was punishing me by making me run alongside them instead of riding." Preston's jaw tightened. "That sounds like Redmond. Man's got no decency." He offered her a strip of jerky from his saddlebag. "Eat something. We've got a long ride to the nearest town." As Jessie chewed the tough meat, she studied her rescuer. Preston Vance was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the western sun, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more often than his current serious demeanor indicated. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands were calloused and strong. "Where are we headed?" she asked finally. "Silver Springs. It's about 2 days' ride from here, barring any trouble." He glanced at her torn dress and battered appearance. "They'll have what you need there. Clean clothes, a proper meal, a doctor to look at that ankle." Jessie nodded, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look. She attempted to smooth her tangled hair, embarrassed. Preston seemed to sense her discomfort. "There's not much daylight left. We should make camp and get an early start tomorrow." He stood, offering his hand to help her up. "Can you walk, or is that ankle too painful?" "I can walk," Jessie insisted, taking his hand and pulling herself upright. She winced as weight settled on her injured ankle but managed to stay standing. Preston regarded her skeptically but didn't argue. "Stay here while I find some firewood." While he was gone, Jessie washed the dirt from her face and arms as best she could, trying to restore some semblance of dignity to her appearance. When Preston returned with an armload of brush and branches, he had also collected some wild berries. "Not much of a supper," he apologized, setting up the campfire. "But it'll supplement the jerky." As darkness fell and the fire crackled between them, Jessie found herself studying the marshal across the flames. There was something compelling about his quiet strength, the way he moved with purpose and confidence. "How long have you been a marshal?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled. Preston poked at the fire with a stick. 7 years now. Before that, I rode with the cavalry for a spell. And you hunt men like Silas Redmond. Men who think they're above the law, he corrected. Men who take what isn't theirs and hurt innocent people in the process. His eyes met hers through the dancing flames. What about you, Miss Knowles? What's your story? Jessie sighed, pulling her knees to her chest. Not much to tell. I was raised by my aunt in Kansas after my parents died of fever. Came west 3 years ago to teach school in Dry Gulch. She gave a hollow laugh. I was just buying supplies when Redmond and his men burst in. Wrong place, wrong time. You're a schoolteacher? Preston asked, surprise evident in his voice. Does that seem so unlikely? She challenged, raising an eyebrow. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not at all. Just wouldn't have guessed it from the way you kept up with those outlaws today. Most schoolteachers I know would have collapsed miles sooner. I nearly did, Jessie admitted. I thought Silas might actually shoot me when I fell that last time. Preston's expression darkened. He would have. Redmond's killed for less. A shiver ran through Jessie that had nothing to do with the cooling night air. Thank you, she said softly, for saving my life. Preston nodded once, acknowledging her gratitude without words. He stood and retrieved a bedroll from his saddlebag, which he handed to her. Get some rest. I'll keep watch. What about you? Jessie asked, accepting the bedroll. I've gone without sleep for longer, he assured her. Besides, Redmond might still be hunting us. Despite her exhaustion, sleep eluded Jessie for some time. She lay wrapped in Preston's bedroll, watching as he sat alert at the edge of their small camp, his rifle across his knees, silhouetted against the starlit sky. Eventually, the rhythmic sound of the creek and the soft rustling of leaves lulled her into a dreamless sleep. She woke to the smell of coffee and the gentle glow of dawn breaking over the eastern horizon. Preston was already up, tending a small fire where a battered pot of coffee brewed. Morning, he greeted, handing her a tin cup of the steaming liquid. Sleep well? Jessie nodded, accepting the cup gratefully. Better than I expected to. She took a sip of the strong, bitter coffee and felt life returning to her limbs. Did you sleep at all? Enough, he replied, though the shadows under his eyes suggested otherwise. How's the ankle? Jessie rotated her foot experimentally. It was stiff and swollen, but the pain had subsided somewhat. Better, I think. Good, Preston said, dousing the fire. We should move. Redmond won't have given up so easily. Within minutes, they had packed up their meager camp and were back on the buckskin stallion, Jessie seated in front of Preston as they rode northward toward Silver Springs. The morning was cool, the air fresh with the scent of sage and juniper. Despite the circumstances, Jessie found herself enjoying the vast, open landscape stretching before them. Have you always lived in the West? She asked over her shoulder, trying to distract herself from the awareness of Preston's proximity. Born in Missouri, he replied, his voice rumbling close to her ear. But I've been out here since I was 16, started as a ranch hand in Texas, then drifted north with the cattle drives. What made you become a marshal? Preston was quiet for so long that Jessie thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, lost someone to men like Redmond. Figured I could either spend my life seeking revenge or try to bring some justice to these territories. The simple, honest answer touched Jessie deeply. She wanted to ask more but sensed his reluctance to elaborate. Instead, she changed the subject. Your horse is beautiful. Does he have a name? She felt, rather than saw, Preston smile. Maverick. Stubborn as they come, but the most loyal animal I've ever known. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the rhythmic movement of the horse lulling Jessie into a peaceful state despite the aches in her body. Around midday, they stopped by a small spring to rest and water Maverick. Preston helped Jessie dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. As they shared a sparse lunch of jerky and the last of the berries, Preston kept glancing at the horizon behind them, his expression guarded. "You think they're still following us?" Jessie observed, not a question. Preston nodded. "Redmond's not the type to let a wound to his pride go unanswered. And I wounded more than his pride yesterday." "I'm slowing you down," Jessie realized with a sinking feeling. "You could move faster without me." Preston's eyes snapped to hers, surprisingly intense. "That's not what I meant." "But it's true," she insisted. "If you were alone, you could outride them easily." "And leave you to fend for yourself?" He shook his head firmly. "Not a chance, Miss Knowles." "Jessie," she reminded him. The corner of his mouth quirked up. "Jessie," he amended. "I'm not in the habit of abandoning people who need protection. Besides," he added, his voice softening slightly, "your pace is the only one I'll keep right now." The simple declaration warmed her more than she cared to admit. She looked away, suddenly flustered by the intensity of his gaze. They continued their journey through the afternoon, the landscape gradually changing as they traveled north. The sparse grasslands gave way to more rugged terrain, dotted with pine trees and rocky outcroppings. Preston guided Maverick confidently through narrow passes and along ridgelines, clearly familiar with the territory. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Preston tensed behind her. "What is it?" Jessie asked, sensing his change in demeanor. "Riders," he said grimly. "Behind us, moving fast." Jessie twisted in the saddle, squinting at the distant dust cloud that marked approaching horsemen. "Redmond?" "Can't be sure, but we can't take chances." Preston urged Maverick into a gallop. "Hold tight!" The buckskin responded immediately, powerful muscles bunching as he surged forward. Jessie gripped the saddle horn, her body pressed against Preston's as they raced across the uneven ground. The wind whipped her hair into a wild tangle, but she barely noticed, too focused on the thundering hooves behind them. Preston guided them toward a densely wooded area ahead, where towering pines promised cover from both pursuers and the fading light. Maverick navigated the uneven terrain with surprising agility for such a large horse, but their pursuers were gaining ground. "They're faster because their horses aren't carrying double," Preston explained between breaths, as if reading her thoughts. "We need to find somewhere defensible." As they entered the tree line, the forest closed around them like a sheltering hand. Preston slowed Maverick to a more careful pace, weaving between tree trunks and over fallen logs. The sound of pursuit grew fainter as their trail became harder to follow in the gathering dusk. Eventually, they came to a small clearing where a rocky overhang created a natural shelter against the mountainside. Preston drew Maverick to a halt and dismounted quickly, reaching up to help Jessie down. "We'll make our stand here if needed," he said, his voice low. "The approach is narrow, and we'll have the high ground." Jessie nodded, trying to hide her fear. Preston led Maverick deeper into the shelter of the rocks, then removed his rifle and a pistol from his saddlebags. He handed the pistol to Jessie. "Ever fired one of these?" he asked. She shook her head, eyeing the weapon warily. "Simple enough," Preston explained, quickly showing her how to cock and fire it. "Just point and squeeze the trigger, but only as a last resort, understand? Stay hidden unless I tell you otherwise." Jessie nodded again, clutching the cold metal in her trembling hand. Preston positioned himself at the edge of their shelter, rifle ready as he scanned the darkening forest. Minutes stretched into an hour as they waited in tense silence. The forest grew quiet around them, the only sounds the occasional call of a night bird and the soft snorting of Maverick behind them. Just as Jessie began to hope their pursuers had lost their trail, Preston stiffened. "Someone's coming," he whispered. "Single rider, moving careful." Jessie's heart hammered in her chest as she pressed herself against the rock wall, the pistol heavy in her hand. Preston raised his rifle, taking aim at the forest edge. A horse and rider emerged slowly from the trees, and Preston's finger tightened on the trigger. Then, unexpectedly, he lowered the weapon. "Sheriff Miller?" he called out, confusion evident in his voice. The rider pulled his horse up short, raising his hands to show he was no threat. "Marshal Vance, that you?" Preston stepped out from their shelter, motioning for Jessie to stay put. "What in blazes are you doing out here, Miller?" The sheriff, a stocky man with a salt and pepper mustache, dismounted with a groan. "Following you, or trying to? Got word about the situation in Dry Gulch and figured you might need backup." "You're alone?" Preston asked skeptically. "Got a posse about half an hour behind me," Miller explained. "Lost your trail for a while, then picked it up again near the creek." He nodded toward where Jessie remained hidden. "That the schoolteacher Redmond took?" Preston hesitated, then called over his shoulder. "Jessie, it's safe. Come on out." Cautiously, Jessie emerged from the shelter, still clutching the pistol. Sheriff Miller tipped his hat to her. "Madam, glad to see you're in one piece. Folks in Dry Gulch were mighty worried about you." "Thank you, Sheriff," Jessie replied, relief washing over her at the sight of the lawman. "How did you know where to find us?" "Wasn't easy," Miller admitted, "but the marshal here leaves tracks that only another tracker would notice." Subtle-like. Preston's tense posture had relaxed somewhat, but he still kept his rifle at the ready. "What about Redmond and his gang?" Miller's expression darkened. "That's the other reason I rode ahead. We spotted them about 5 miles back, moving in this direction. They've split up 3 riders coming straight, the others circling around to the east." "They're trying to box us in," Preston muttered. He glanced at Jessie, concern evident in his eyes. "How far to Silver Springs from here?" 15 miles, give or take," Miller replied, "but there's a line shack about 3 miles north that would be easier to defend until my posse arrives." Preston considered this information, his gaze moving between Jessie and the darkening forest. "We'll head for the shack," he decided. "Jessie's been through enough without another gunfight." "I can handle myself," Jessie protested, though the weight of the pistol in her hand belied her confidence. Preston's expression softened slightly. "I know you can. But there's no sense taking unnecessary risks." They wasted no time preparing to move out. Preston helped Jessie onto Maverick once more, then mounted behind her. Sheriff Miller took the lead, guiding them through the forest on a narrow game trail that wound northward through increasingly dense undergrowth. The night had fully descended now, and the forest was alive with sounds that made Jessie jump: the distant howl of a coyote, the rustle of unseen creatures in the brush, the occasional snap of a twig beneath their horses' hooves. The moon provided just enough light to navigate by, casting silver patterns through the pine branches overhead. They rode in tense silence, each straining to hear any sign of pursuit. After what seemed like an eternity, the trees thinned, and they emerged onto a small clearing where a crude log cabin stood, its single window dark and uninviting. "Not much," Sheriff Miller commented as they approached, "but solid enough. Trappers use it in winter months." Preston dismounted first, then helped Jessie down, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. The brief contact sent warmth through her despite the chill of the night air. "Wait here," he instructed, drawing his pistol before approaching the cabin cautiously. He disappeared inside for a moment, then emerged in the doorway. "All clear." The interior of the line shack was sparse but serviceable: a small iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 stools, and a narrow cot against one wall. Sheriff Miller busied himself lighting a lantern while Preston secured the horses at the back of the cabin. "We should keep the light low," Miller advised. "No sense advertising our position." Jessie sank onto one of the stools, her legs trembling with exhaustion now that the immediate danger had passed. The events of the past 2 days crashed over her like a wave, and she struggled to maintain her composure. Preston returned and immediately noticed her distress. Without a word, he shrugged off his coat and placed it around her shoulders. The garment was warm from his body and smelled of leather, pine, and something uniquely him. "Thank you," she murmured, pulling it closer around herself. He nodded once, then turned to Miller. "How long until your posse reaches us?" The sheriff checked his pocket watch in the dim lantern light. "Should be here within the hour, barring trouble." "I left clear signs for them to follow." "And Redmond?" Miller's expression was grim. "Hard to say. If they picked up our trail, could be sooner." Preston moved to the cabin's single window, peering out into the darkness. "I'll take first watch. Miller, get some rest. We may need to move quickly if Redmond finds us before your men arrive." The sheriff didn't argue, stretching out on the floor near the stove with his hat over his face. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into the steady rhythm of sleep. Jessie remained on the stool, watching Preston's silhouette against the window. His vigilance, his unwavering protection since the moment he'd rescued her from Redmond's gang, stirred something deep within her, a feeling both unfamiliar and thrilling. Rising quietly, she moved to stand beside him at the window. "You should rest too," she suggested softly. "You've barely slept since yesterday." Preston glanced down at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "I'll sleep when you're safe in Silver Springs." "You can't protect everyone all the time, Marshal," she said gently. "Preston," he corrected her, the faintest hint of a smile touching his lips. "And I'm not trying to protect everyone. Just you." The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with unspoken meaning. Jessie found herself studying his face, the strong line of his jaw, the subtle curve of his mouth, the intensity in his eyes that seemed to see right through her carefully constructed composure. "Why?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Preston turned to face her fully then, something vulnerable flickering across his features before his customary reserve reasserted itself. "Because you're worth protecting, Jessie Knowles." Before she could respond, a sound outside caught his attention, the faint but unmistakable crack of a twig beneath a heavy boot. Preston's hand moved to his holster as he pushed Jessie behind him. "Miller," he called softly, instantly awakening the sheriff. "Company." The sheriff was on his feet in an instant, gun drawn. "How many?" "Can't tell," Preston replied, extinguishing the lantern with a quick puff of breath. The cabin plunged into darkness, broken only by thin slivers of moonlight through the cracks in the walls. "Jessie, get down and stay away from the windows." She crouched in the corner as instructed, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain it would give away their position. Preston and Sheriff Miller took positions on either side of the cabin's single door, weapons ready. The silence stretched, broken only by the sound of Jessie's own breathing. Then, without warning, a voice called from the darkness outside. "Marshal Vance, we know you're in there. Send out the girl and maybe we'll let you live." Jessie recognized Silas Redmond's gravelly drawl immediately, and fear closed her throat. "Not going to happen, Redmond," Preston called back, his voice steady and controlled. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. Surrender now, and I'll see you get a fair trial." Redmond's laughter was cold and humorless. "Outnumbered? My boys counted just 3 horses. That's you, the girl, and whoever rode in after you. Not exactly an army, Marshal." "My posse's less than an hour behind," Miller shouted. "You'd be wise to heed the Marshal, Redmond." Another voice joined Redmond's outside, lower and more urgent. There was a brief, heated exchange that Jessie couldn't make out. Then Redmond called again. "We'll give you 5 minutes to reconsider, Marshal. After that, we burn the cabin down around you." The threat hung in the air like a physical presence. Preston moved to Jessie's side, crouching beside her in the darkness. "He's bluffing," he whispered. The wood's too green to catch easily, and they'd risk being seen for miles around. But they will attack, Jessie whispered back, certain of it. Preston nodded, his face grim in the moonlight filtering through the cracks. Miller's posse is our best hope. We just need to hold out until they arrive. Jessie swallowed hard, trying to quell the fear rising in her throat. And if they don't arrive in time? Preston's hand found hers in the darkness, his calloused fingers wrapping firmly around her smaller ones. Then we fight. But I won't let them take you, Jessie. I promise you that. The warmth and certainty in his voice steadied her racing heart. In that moment, with danger surrounding them and future uncertain, Jessie realized with startling clarity that she trusted this man completely, this stranger who had risked everything to save her and continued to place himself between her and harm. "I believe you," she whispered, squeezing his hand. Their moment of connection was shattered by the crash of something heavy hitting the cabin door. Preston was on his feet instantly, moving back to his position with weapon drawn. "They're trying to break in," Miller hissed, taking aim at the shuddering door. Another crash, and the rough wooden door splintered along its hinges. Preston fired through the widening gap, and a cry of pain confirmed his shot had found its mark. Return fire exploded through the damaged door, sending splinters flying across the cabin interior. Jessie pressed herself against the wall, the pistol Preston had given her clutched in her trembling hands. The air filled with gun smoke and the deafening report of weapons as Preston and Sheriff Miller exchanged fire with Redmond's gang outside. Through the chaos, Jessie spotted movement at the cabin's single window, a shadowy figure attempting to climb through. Without thinking, she raised her pistol and fired. The recoil nearly knocked the weapon from her hands, but her shot was true. The figure at the window crumpled with a startled cry. Preston glanced back at her, surprise and something like admiration flashing across his face, before he returned his attention to the door, which was now hanging by a single hinge. "We can't hold them much longer," Miller shouted over the gunfire. "Too many angles of attack." As if in response to his assessment, the cabin's rear wall exploded inward as something, perhaps a small explosive charge, detonated against it. Miller was thrown forward by the blast, landing heavily on the floor, blood spreading from a wound in his shoulder. Jessie scrambled to the sheriff's side, pressing her hands against the bleeding wound. Miller's face was ashen, his breathing labored. "Get to the horses," he gasped. "Both of you, go!" Preston fired several more shots through the damaged door before kneeling beside them. "Can you ride?" he asked Miller urgently. The sheriff shook his head. "Not fast enough. I'll cover you. Get the girl to safety." Preston's jaw tightened, the conflict evident in his expression. "I won't leave you to die, Miller." "Not asking," the sheriff gritted out. "It's an order. Go." Before Preston could respond, a volley of gunfire peppered the cabin walls. He pulled Jessie down, shielding her body with his own as bullets whizzed overhead. When the firing paused, he looked into her eyes, his decision made. "Stay low and follow me to the back. When I say run, head straight for Maverick. Don't stop for anything, understand?" Jessie nodded, her throat too tight for words. Preston helped Miller prop himself against the remaining wall, placing extra ammunition within the wounded sheriff's reach. "My posse will find you," Miller assured them, grimacing through his pain. "Just get clear of here." With a final nod to the sheriff, Preston took Jessie's hand and led her in a crouched run toward the gaping hole in the rear wall. Outside, the night was alive with shadows and the occasional muzzle flash as Redmond's men repositioned themselves. "Ready?" Preston whispered, his mouth close to her ear. Jessie nodded, adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Run!" They burst through the opening together, Preston firing his pistol to clear their path as they sprinted toward where the horses were tethered. Shots rang out behind them, dirt kicking up at their feet as bullets narrowly missed their mark. Preston reached Maverick first, untying the reins with one fluid motion while still returning fire with his free hand. He boosted Jessie into the saddle, then swung up behind her just as a bullet grazed his upper arm, tearing through his shirt sleeve. "Hold on!" he commanded, spurring Maverick forward. The buckskin stallion needed little encouragement, leaping forward into a gallop that nearly unseated them both. They thundered away from the cabin, bullets whistling past them as Redmond's men continued firing. Preston kept low over Jessie, using his body to shield her as they raced into the forest. "The sheriff!" Jessie gasped as the sounds of gunfire receded behind them. "We left him there to die." "Miller's tougher than he looks," Preston assured her, though the tension in his voice betrayed his concern. "And his posse will be here soon. Our best move is to reach Silver Springs and bring back reinforcements." They rode hard through the night, Maverick navigating the forest trails with sure-footed confidence despite the darkness. Preston kept them moving north, occasionally changing direction to confuse any pursuers. The moon had begun its descent toward the western horizon when he finally slowed their pace, allowing the exhausted horse to catch its breath. "Are we safe?" Jessie asked, her voice hoarse from the cold night air. "For now," Preston replied, his arms still secure around her waist. "I don't hear anyone following, but Redmond won't give up easily." Jessie twisted in the saddle to look at him, noticing for the first time the dark stain on his sleeve. "You're hurt!" Preston glanced down at his arm dismissively. "Just a graze. I've had worse." "We should still tend to it," she insisted. "It could become infected." He acquiesced with a slight nod, guiding Maverick toward a small stream that glinted in the moonlight. They dismounted, and Preston allowed Jessie to examine his wound by the water's edge. The bullet had indeed only grazed him, leaving a furrow along his upper arm that bled sluggishly. Jessie tore a strip from her already tattered petticoat and dipped it in the cool stream water. "This might sting," she warned before pressing the damp cloth to his wound. Preston didn't flinch, watching her face instead of her ministrations. "You handled yourself well back there," he said quietly. "Not many could have kept their wits in such a situation." Jessie smiled faintly as she bound his arm with another strip of fabric. "I surprised myself, to be honest. I've never fired a gun before today." "Well, you're a natural," he replied, a hint of admiration in his tone. "You saved us both when you shot that man at the window." The reality of what she'd done possibly killed a man hit Jessie suddenly, and she faltered, her hands stilling on the makeshift bandage. "I didn't think. I just saw him," and reacted. Preston's hand covered hers, warm and reassuring. "It was him or us." "Jessie, you did what you had to do." She nodded, unable to meet his eyes as she finished securing the bandage. When she finally looked up, she found him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Thank you," he said simply, though his words seemed to carry a weight beyond the tending of his wound. They remained by the stream for a few minutes longer, allowing Maverick to drink his fill before continuing their journey. The eastern sky had begun to lighten with the first hint of dawn when they crested a ridge and saw the scattered lights of a town in the valley below. "Silver Springs," Preston announced, relief evident in his voice. "We made it." The town was just stirring to life as they rode down the main street, early risers pausing in their morning routines to stare at the disheveled pair on the tired buckskin. Preston guided Maverick directly to the sheriff's office, a solid brick building at the center of town. The local sheriff, a burly man named Thompson, was already at his desk when they entered. He rose immediately at the sight of Preston's badge. "Marshal Vance," he greeted, then took in their appearance with raised eyebrows. "Looks like you've had some trouble." Preston quickly explained the situation: Redmond's gang, Jessie's abduction, the confrontation at the line shack, and Sheriff Miller's wounded condition. Thompson wasted no time organizing a rescue party, dispatching deputies to gather men and supplies. "We'll ride out within the hour," he assured them. "In the meantime, you both look like you could use some rest and a hot meal." The hotel across the street has clean rooms, and Mrs. Thompson runs a boarding house with the best cooking in 3 counties. Preston nodded gratefully. Thank you, Sheriff. We'll take you up on that offer. But I want to join your posse when you ride out. Preston, Jessie began to protest, concerned about his injury and exhaustion. I need to make sure Miller's all right, he said firmly, and I intend to see Redmond brought to justice. Sheriff Thompson looked between them, a knowing gleam in his eye. The posse won't leave for at least an hour, Marshal. Plenty of time for you to get the lady settled and grab some food yourself. Outside the sheriff's office, the town had fully awakened, the streets bustling with morning activity. Preston placed a protective hand at the small of Jessie's back as he guided her toward the hotel. The simple touch sent warmth spreading through her despite her exhaustion. The hotel proprietor, a kindly older woman named Mrs. Hollister, took one look at Jessie's bedraggled appearance and immediately ushered her upstairs to a room with a promise of hot bath water and clean clothes. Your husband can wait downstairs, she assured Jessie, misinterpreting their relationship. He's not. Jessie began to correct her, but the woman had already bustled off to arrange for the bath. Left alone in the small but clean room, Jessie sank onto the edge of the bed, the events of the past days crashing over her in waves. She was safe now, but Sheriff Miller might be dead or dying, and Preston would soon ride back into danger to confront Redmond. The thought of Preston facing those outlaws again made her stomach clench with fear. In the short time she'd known him, he had become more than just her rescuer. He had become someone she cared for deeply, someone she couldn't bear to lose. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Jessie, it's Preston. She rose and opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, his expression concerned. Are you all right? You looked unsteady when we arrived. Just tired, she assured him, though that hardly covered the tumult of emotions she was experiencing. Mrs. Hollister is arranging a bath for me. Preston nodded, relief softening his features. Good. I've arranged for some clothes to be sent up as well. The general store owner's wife is about your size and was happy to help. Thank you, Jessie said, touched by his thoughtfulness. What about you? Will you rest before riding out? I'll grab something to eat, he promised. Sheriff Thompson says his posse won't leave for another hour at least. An awkward silence fell between them, filled with things unsaid. Preston shifted his weight, uncharacteristically hesitant. Jessie, he began, just as Mrs. Hollister appeared at the end of the hall with 2 young men carrying a copper bathtub. Coming through, the proprietress called cheerfully. Bath for the young lady. Preston stepped back, whatever he had been about to say lost in the commotion. I should let you get settled, he said instead. I'll check on you before we ride out. Jessie wanted to call him back, to ask what he had been about to say, but the moment had passed. She watched him walk away, his broad shoulders set with determination despite his obvious fatigue. The hot bath was blissful beyond words, washing away the dirt and fear of the past days. The clean clothes, a simple blue calico dress and sturdy boots, felt like unimaginable luxury after her torn and filthy garments. By the time she had dressed and combed the tangles from her hair, she felt almost human again. A timid knock at the door revealed a young maid with a tray of food-hot biscuits, ham, eggs, and steaming coffee. Jessie realized she was ravenous and thanked the girl profusely. She was halfway through the meal when another knock came, stronger this time. She opened the door to find Preston standing there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, though the same trail-worn pants and boots. May I come in? He asked, his hat in his hands. Jessie nodded, stepping aside to allow him entry. She noticed that he had rebandaged his arm properly, the white cloth visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. The posse is almost ready to ride, he said, standing somewhat awkwardly in the center of the room. I wanted to check on you before I left. I'm fine, she assured him, though the thought of him leaving filled her with dread. Have you eaten? He nodded and rested a bit. Sheriff Thompson has 20 men riding out, all well armed. We'll find Miller and bring Redmond to justice. Jessie stepped closer to him, unable to hide her concern. Please be careful. Redmond is dangerous, and you're already injured. I've faced worse odds, Preston said with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. He hesitated, then added, Jessie, if something happens to me, don't, she interrupted, placing her hand on his arm. Don't talk that way. Preston covered her hand with his own. I need to say this. If I don't return, Sheriff Thompson will ensure you get safely back to Dry Gulch. You'll be taken care of. I don't want to be taken care of, Jessie said fiercely. I want you to come back safely. Something shifted in Preston's expression, a softening around his eyes that made her heart beat faster. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he raised his hand to cup her cheek. I have every intention of coming back, Jessie Knowles, he said softly. I find I have a compelling reason to do so. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle, questioning kiss. Jessie responded immediately, her hands moving to his shoulders as she rose on tiptoe to meet him. The kiss deepened, becoming something urgent and necessary, a promise and a declaration all at once. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Preston rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since I first saw you standing up to Redmond, covered in dust but unbowed. Jessie smiled, her heart full to bursting. I think I've wanted you to since you said my pace was the only one you'd keep. A shout from outside broke the moment the posse calling for Preston. He straightened reluctantly, his eyes never leaving hers. Wait for me, he said, the words somewhere between a question and a command. I will, she promised, reaching up to touch his face one last time before he left. Come back to me, Preston Vance. With a final swift kiss, he was gone, striding down the hallway with renewed purpose. Jessie moved to the window, watching as he mounted Maverick and joined the posse gathering in the street below. Just before they rode out, he looked up, finding her at the window with unerring accuracy. He touched the brim of his hat in salute, then turned and led the men out of town at a gallop. Jessie remained at the window long after they had disappeared from sight, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart torn between hope and fear for what lay ahead. The hours of waiting were interminable. Jessie tried to rest but found herself too anxious to sleep for more than brief, fitful periods. She paced the small hotel room, occasionally venturing downstairs to the lobby where other townspeople had gathered, all waiting for news of the posse. As afternoon stretched into evening with no word, the mood in town grew increasingly tense. Jessie overheard whispered conversations about Silas Redmond's reputation, each story more chilling than the last. By nightfall, her nerves were stretched to the breaking point. Mrs. Hollister tried to persuade her to eat something, but Jessie could barely manage a few bites of the stew the kind woman brought to her room. Every distant sound had her rushing to the window, hoping to see riders returning. It was well past midnight when the lookout posted at the edge of town finally called the alarm. Riders coming! It's the posse! Jessie flew down the stairs and into the street, heedless of the late hour or her disheveled appearance. A crowd had already gathered, straining to see in the darkness. Lanterns were hastily lit, illuminating the main street as the first riders appeared. Sheriff Thompson led the group, his expression grim but satisfied. Behind him came several deputies escorting prisoners, 4 men with their hands bound, riding double with posse members. Jessie recognized Silas Redmond among them, his face bruised and bloody, his arrogance replaced by defeated rage. She scanned the returning men anxiously, her heart in her throat as she searched for Preston. For one terrible moment she couldn't find him, and fear clutched at her chest with icy fingers. Then the crowd parted, and she saw him riding slowly at the rear, supporting a wounded man on the horse before him. "Sheriff Miller!" Someone in the crowd exclaimed, "He's alive!" Relief washed over Jessie in a dizzying wave. Not only had Preston returned safely, but he had also managed to rescue Miller. She pushed through the crowd, reaching the edge of the street just as Preston dismounted and helped lower the injured sheriff into waiting arms. When Preston turned and saw her standing there, the weariness seemed to fall away from him. In 3 long strides, he crossed the distance between them and swept her into his arms, heedless of the curious onlookers. Jessie clung to him, breathing in his scent, reassuring herself that he was truly here, solid and alive. "You came back," she whispered against his chest. "I promised I would," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. He pulled back slightly to look at her face, his eyes drinking her in as if memorizing every feature. "Redmond and what's left of his gang will stand trial. It's over, Jessie." The town doctor had arrived to tend to Sheriff Miller, and Preston reluctantly released Jessie to help carry the wounded man to the doctor's office. Jessie followed, unwilling to let Preston out of her sight again so soon. In the crowded doctor's office, Sheriff Thompson recounted the confrontation while the doctor worked on Miller's shoulder wound. The posse had arrived at the line shack to find Miller still holding off the remaining outlaws, though badly wounded and nearly out of ammunition. In the ensuing gunfight, 2 of Redmond's men had been killed, and the rest, including Redmond himself, had surrendered when faced with the overwhelming force of the posse. "Marshal Vance here was like a man possessed," Thompson concluded with admiration. "Rode right into the thick of it to get to Miller, then personally captured Redmond when he tried to escape." Preston, standing quietly by the wall, shrugged off the praise. "Miller did the hard part, holding them off alone for hours." The injured sheriff managed a weak chuckle from the examination table. "Wasn't planning to die in some godforsaken line shack. Besides, I knew you'd come back, Marshal. You're too stubborn to leave a job unfinished." When the doctor assured them that Miller would recover with proper rest, Preston finally allowed himself to be examined. His arm wound had reopened during the fight, and he had sustained a few new cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. Jessie stayed by his side throughout, her hand finding his whenever possible, a silent reassurance that he was truly safe. It was nearly dawn by the time they left the doctor's office. The excitement in town had died down, the prisoners secured in the jail. The posse members dispersed to their homes or the saloon to celebrate their success. Preston walked Jessie back to the hotel, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back. They moved slowly, both exhausted but reluctant to part. When they reached her door, Preston hesitated, clearly wrestling with something. "Jessie," he began, his voice low and serious, "I need to get you back to Dry Gulch. The town council has been sending telegrams daily, concerned about their schoolteacher." Jessie felt a pang of disappointment. With the danger past, reality was intruding. Of course, she had responsibilities in Dry Gulch, a life to return to. And Preston was a U.S. Marshal with duties that would take him elsewhere. "I understand," she said, trying to keep the sadness from her voice. "When will we leave?" "As soon as you're ready," he replied. "Tomorrow, if that suits you. It's a 2-day ride, but we won't have to worry about outlaws this time." Jessie nodded, unable to meet his eyes for fear he would see the tears threatening to spill. "Tomorrow, then." Preston lifted her chin gently, forcing her to look at him. What she saw in his eyes made her breath catch, not regret or distance, but tenderness and something deeper, more profound. "Jessie Knowles," he said softly. "I've spent 7 years chasing outlaws across these territories, never staying in one place longer than it took to bring in whoever I was hunting. I told myself it was enough doing my job, bringing some justice to the frontier." He took her hands in his thumbs tracing gentle circles on her palms. "Then I found you, being forced to run at an outlaw's pace, and something changed. For the first time, I found myself thinking about more than the next fugitive, the next town." Jessie's heart hammered in her chest as Preston continued, his voice growing more certain with each word. I'm not a man of fancy words or grand gestures, but I know what I feel, and these past days have shown me what truly matters. He took a deep breath. I'm not just taking you back to Dry Gulch to resume your old life. I'm asking if, perhaps, you might consider a new one with me. Joy bloomed in Jessie's chest, so overwhelming she could barely speak. Are you proposing, Marshal Vance? She managed finally, a smile breaking through her tears. Inelegantly, perhaps, he admitted with a rueful smile. But yes, I am. I know it's sudden, and I'll understand if you need time to consider. Jessie silenced him with a kiss, rising on tiptoe to press her lips firmly against his. When she pulled back, her decision was written clearly in her eyes. I don't need time, she said. These past days have shown me more about you and about myself than years of ordinary acquaintance could have. I know what I want, Preston, and it's a life with you. The smile that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, radiant and full of promise. He wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in an uncharacteristic display of emotion. I can't offer you an easy life, he warned as he set her down again. A marshal's wife faces certain hardships. I think I've proven I can handle hardship, Jessie replied with a smile. Besides, I seem to recall someone saying my pace was the only one he'd keep. I'm holding you to that, Preston Vance. Their journey back to Dry Gulch was markedly different from their desperate flight to Silver Springs. They traveled at a leisurely pace, taking time to enjoy the vast, beautiful landscape and each other's company. Where before there had been tension and fear, now there was laughter and growing affection, punctuated by stolen kisses when they stopped to rest. Preston spoke of his plans finishing his current assignment tracking Redmond's remaining associates, then requesting a more permanent posting, perhaps as sheriff in a growing town where Jessie could continue teaching. She shared her own hopes and dreams, the two of them weaving their separate futures into a shared vision. When they finally reached Dry Gulch, they were greeted like returning heroes. The entire town turned out to welcome their schoolteacher home and to thank the marshal who had saved her. Jessie was touched by their concern and relieved to find her small cottage had been maintained in her absence. That evening, as they sat on her porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Preston took her hand. I have to leave tomorrow, he said regretfully. There are reports of Redmond's brother gathering men 2 counties over, possibly planning revenge. I need to investigate. Jessie nodded, having expected this. How long will you be gone? 2 weeks, perhaps 3, he replied. Then I'll be back, and we can be married, if you're still willing. In answer, Jessie leaned over and kissed him softly. I'll be waiting. Just remember your promise about my pace. Preston smiled, pulling her closer against his side. It's the only one I'll ever keep, Jessie Knowles, from now until forever. True to his word, Preston returned to Dry Gulch exactly 3 weeks later. They were married in the small church with the entire town in attendance, Sheriff Miller having recovered enough to travel from Silver Springs to witness their union. As Preston slipped a simple gold band onto Jessie's finger, he repeated the words that had come to mean so much to both of them. Your pace is the only one I'll keep, now and always. In the years that followed, Preston became sheriff of Dry Gulch, while Jessie continued teaching, eventually opening a larger school as the town grew. They faced hardships, as Preston had warned drought years that tested the community, occasional brushes with outlaws who didn't know the town's sheriff was a legendary marshal, the loss of their first child before birth that nearly broke them both. But through it all, they moved forward together, at a pace they set for themselves, neither too fast nor too slow. They were blessed with 3 healthy children, eventually 2 sons and a daughter, who inherited her mother's determination and her father's sense of justice. And on their 20th anniversary, as they sat on the same porch where Preston had promised to return, watching their children play in the yard, Jessie rested her head on her husband's shoulder. "Any regrets?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Preston's arm tightened around her, his lips brushing her temple. "Not a single one. You were worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth changing my entire life for." "Even though I was too slow to outrun outlaws?" she teased. Preston chuckled, the sound still as warm and reassuring as it had been 2 decades earlier. "Especially because of that," he replied. "If you hadn't been too slow, I might never have found the one pace worth keeping for the rest of my life." As the sun set on Dry Gulch, painting the desert in the same golden hues as the day Preston had returned to marry her, Jessie knew that sometimes being too slow could lead to the most important journeys of all if you were fortunate enough to find someone willing to match your stride, step for step, heart for heart, for all the days to come.